Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are back with session number 6 of Sunderhearth. It's kind of a little experiment, a project here on the channel where we world build, but we do so through improvisation. We make it up right here on the spot in front of all of you. And it's been very exciting so far. We've had 5 really interesting sessions that have already made this setting someplace that I can't wait to run games in, and I'm very excited to be touching on the episode that we have tonight for you, which is going to be about religion. But before we get too deep into that, I'm going to pass things over to the man who had this little dream, this project born in his brain, my partner in crime here, Steve. Perhaps one day we could be so lucky. But yeah, we're going through a lot of very trying things right now as a people, as a country here in the United States, at least, and hopefully, maybe even through painful transition, we'll be learning to do better. I can't wait. But speaking of doing better, our guest this evening, Ben, why don't you say hi to the people? Yeah, I think if you sat down and did this kind of thing with a table full of people who are going to be playing through a campaign that took place in this, you would come out with a very, very strong, um, a strong story. My goodness gracious. Yeah, my audio stuff is all juggled around currently because of a party that I attended virtually yesterday, and I knew it was going to screw my stuff up. I just knew it. So give me a second, folks. Hopefully I can figure this out real quick. Um, maybe in here. Hang on a second. So everybody has been paying wonderful compliments to you as an audience so far. I'm sorry that you've missed out on that. They've been going on at great length about how wonderful each of you are. Okay, so let's see. Put. Okay, try to say something, somebody. One of you two.
Say something, somebody.
Chat, let me know if
Okay.
that is better.
Right. Hey, hey.
Yeah, let us know you can hear us, because if not,
Please, somebody.
Th- th-
Can anybody in that chat hear them now? Did that change anything?
Hello, hello.
Hoping so.
we shall see momentarily. It'll be perfect. My dad and Rachel will both have stepped away from the computer at the exact same time, and we just won't. Yeah, they can hear us.
Yes.
We're good.
Perfect.
Yay.
Thank you very, very much. Excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah, I
Right.
have discovered in learning all of the things that I have had to learn about running a YouTube channel and trying to incorporate OBS and all of that great stuff, that audio is a
Oh man.
huge weakness of mine. I don't understand it at all.
I was the same way in college, man. Like I could do lighting, I could do stagecraft. It came to like sound, and I'm like, all right, well, microphones, they're a thing, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're back on track now. So, I guess let's have yeah, both of you introduce yourselves again, if you would please.
All right, well,
Steve,
I'm
go first.
Steve. I do this other thing with him here where we do words and things and we build stuff. So anyway, uh overall, if you're jumping in here, this is session 6, right? It's completely fine to jump into session 6 and then go back and rewatch whatever you want. No big deal. It's going to go to 12 sessions. It has been a cooperative world building where we've gotten beautiful and wonderful minds from around the tabletop community to come in here and talk to us about this very nebulous idea that I had. And Jeremy was kind enough to entertain me with saying, "Sure, we can do it on my channel." And so it's been great. We've had some wonderful sessions so far. Tonight, at the end of it, will be the halfway point. And the only other thing I said was, if you can't be good out there, just try not to be bad. That's it.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for running us through what you had to say a second time, Steve. I appreciate it. Ben, why don't you say hello to people for real this time?
All right. Hello for real to the people. Um, no, I'm Ben. You can find me pretty much all over the internets, but especially in the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group in various discussions there. Been playing games a long time, been world building longer than that. And I just said this is a really cool experiment. Games about collaboration, so why not world build in that way? And if you've never tried something like this, maybe give it a go with your players before you play your next game.
Yeah, and again, once again, I do agree. Sitting down with a table full of people would make this a very, very fantastic story because there's a lot of investment and buy-in that gets inserted into the ground level of the world that you're building together, which always makes for a good return, as far as my experience goes. So I
And
highly encourage it.
if you're not sure where to start with that microscope, man, that's a great system for
Mm-hmm.
doing kind of exactly
Oh
this.
yeah.
Like, so if you don't want to just jump into it whole hog and blind like we did, pick up microscope. It's relatively cheap, and it kind of walks you through world building and even gives you some role playing opportunities during the world building. So that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't gotten the chance to try Microscope yet, but I have heard a lot of really good things from people that I trust their tastes in
Mm.
games from, and it's definitely on my radar at some point to give a shot. I played a board game role playing game called Icarus that also was a recommendation from someone, and it's kind of the same thing. You build as you play this society, this world, kind of together, and then through the course of it, it all comes crashing down. So it's kind of a fun little experiment, much like this. So, yeah, one of the main topic that we planned on discussing this evening is religion and what that kind of looks like and means in the world of Sunderhearth. So, as always, we don't have any notes coming in. I don't have any notes coming in, at least. This is all kind of going to be invented on the spot. It's kind of the whole idea behind the project, and so far it's worked pretty well. So, do any of you guys have a launching off point for us?
Um, So something that I just thought about this afternoon when I was actually out grocery shopping, of all things. Uh, and this would be a very good opening question for us and kind of get us going, is in a lot of fantasy worlds, you have both human gods and then other races have their own gods. That is, I don't know, emblematic of a lot of settings where that happens. So I guess that'd be a good place to start is how do we feel about that, right? Do dwarves and elves have their own gods separate from the human gods, or is there just a single pantheon and perhaps they're called different names? We kind of touched on it last session, but we didn't really ever hyper define that idea.
So I don't know if this is off base, you'll let me know, but it seems like from a tone perspective, the setting has a lot of us versus them kind of in it. People inside Sunderhearth, people outside, and how they're affected in different ways. And I think it's a lot more interesting if these different cultures have their own gods, because all of a sudden, no matter who they are, they're kind of cut off.
So the quiet, the dark, the blackout, as it were, for divine magic isn't just humans, isn't just the human culture. It's affecting everybody equally. That's cool.
Right.
So, all right, if we chase that rabbit for a second, we had talked through some of, I think, in particularly in the magic session, that when the group had killed or had attempted to kill what is now the shattered god, the other god sort of stepped back and said, "Wait, we don't want any part of that. Thanks. Like, we also would not like to be killed." Or they were quiet because they were biding their time. It's going to depend on the deity, and I guess that's a good thing to talk about tonight. So if they sort of took a step back when that happened, what would be the reasoning that the other racial gods would have for stepping back as well, and not perhaps seeing this as an opportunity to further their people's, I don't want to say dominance, but to move them up a peg?
Yeah. I kind of just had a thought about that while you were talking. So inside Sunderhearth, the connection with the planes has become loose and thin, correct?
So yeah, it tends to leak over because of how much magic was dumped out during that attempted sacrifice.
Right.
Mhm.
So if there is that much less outside of Sunderhearth, would you have kind of the opposite reaction with the planes being even more distant than they were before outside of Sunderhearth?
So is the event of the attempted death of one god enough to have shifted the entire cosmology of existence? Whew. It's interesting, right? Is the one thing that we have sort of maintained as a through line is that the outside of the cutoff of magic, everything else is very localized inside of Sunderhearth, right? Like the magic, the weirdness, is very localized. So, I mean, could it be that that's the one thing that escaped the barriers, is the actual distancing of planes on the outside?
Possibly. And I kind of like the idea that the hole in the ozone, quote unquote, if you will, the thinning of the veil between all the different layers of existence, being kind of at the center of Sunderhearth, has somehow thickened or hardened the ability to travel between the planes outside of Sunderhearth, and that could possibly, therefore, even affect the gods in the way that they're able to manifest or affect things in the mortal coil. I think that's really cool.
I like the idea. So what if it's a compound effect, right? So we know that part of the reason that magic doesn't work outside of Sunderhearth is quite literally the vector for it, the god of magic, is no longer in place, right? He's the switchboard operator, right? And he's not there to be able to connect you. So it's not that your god doesn't have powers, and it's not that you're not a cleric. It's just that there's no one able to connect the line. If the gods outside, to carry on this ridiculous analogy, if the gods outside changed their phone numbers because they didn't want people on the outside attempting to essentially summon them down, right? Like through ritual, being able to call down an avatar or the equivalent thereof. So they changed their phone numbers. Other gods said, hey, wait a second. If magic's gone haywire, maybe if we as a group distance the planes from each other, we don't have to worry about the evil gods doing anything out of sorts while our people don't have full access to magic, right? So it was kind of like a fail-safe device. One, to cover their own butts, and two, to make sure that bad things don't happen.
Yeah, and they may be wanting to isolate themselves from one another as well if they think there's a betrayer out there somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that would probably likely be a prevailing theory amongst the other gods. Because, I mean, how in the world could mortals ever have pulled this off on their own? You know, that would be an impossibility to most of their thinkings.
Right. And we had talked about that during the magic episode that that this ritual was leaked to them by a god. Like another god literally showed up and was like, hey, by the way, did you know you could do this?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So on the outside, they have distanced themselves. Enacting, the sort of deific levels of magic, they have pulled the planes further away from the realm outside of Sunderhearth, which, as my father said in the comments over here, also keeps sort of demons and devils focused on Sunderhearth, right? If they want to be able to cross over, that becomes the entry point, right? And the same thing for any sort of other being, even benign or not, they kind of have to go through that one doorway, right? So the gods, built a wall essentially. And now Sunderhearth is the gate. All right, I like that a lot. So we know that there are multi-racial gods, right? Now, is it that the dwarves have their own, and elves have their own, and halflings have their own, and etc., etc., or is it that there was a set of gods that made other races and a set of gods that made humans? Like, what are we thinking as far as that goes? Or even a step further back, who made the gods?
So, as far as like who made the gods, I don't think that's a question that we have to answer personally.
Good.
Because creating a pantheon is one of the things about world building that is a make or break moment typically. Because if you're going to build a pantheon, a full scale pantheon, if you're angling for Egyptian or Greek or Roman or whatever, Nordic, that is an endeavor and a half in and of itself. Especially if you want there to be context and relationships and history. You're basically creating a second world that kind of piggybacks onto your setting. And I have two settings where the pantheons are large. So my initial instinct is to create a small pantheon for this so that it's a lot more manageable. But that is totally a meta choice on my behalf. So I'm going to toss that ball over to you guys.
In my limited experience of seeing smaller pantheons result in kind of a heavier focus on religion in the setting, because there's more opportunity for detail in the individual deities themselves. So I think maybe a first question is, how much of a focus do you want religion to be versus everything else that's going on already?
Right. So, I mean, my take on it is, again, we kind of default to this answer a lot, but it's going to kind of be up to the DM, right? Like,
Yeah,
because if you want to turn this into a cult war, right, a religious war against this cult, and you could go that route. Or if you wanted to do it where your group of players are like, hey, we want our god to be the next god of magic, you could go that route. I do think something is interesting, trying to keep it small though. So a lot of mythologies, like at their base level, sort of have like a mother goddess and a father god, right? Like that tends to be a thing. Um, and I think it'd be really unique or interesting, maybe not unique, but interesting if the elves had a mother god and a father god, the dwarves had so on and so forth. And the humans are like, nah, we need more than that. Like, we're going to need a god of magic and a god of harvest. And so, because over time, these elements got worshipped, they took on sort of being deific. And perhaps even back at the beginning of time, there was a really good farmer who kept being gone to for advice. And so eventually his renown gets to a point where people start almost thinking of him as a deity. And maybe he ascends as they do in Faerun, with
right.
Celeborn and so on and so forth.
Well, one of the things that we brought up, and I think it might have been last session, was kind of the different races having more of an elemental affinity that they're kind of bound into. That maybe that was how this old world kind of came into existence or came to be or what have you. So what if those mother father deities for these other races were simply things like different aspects of their elemental affinity? So the dwarves, I think we decided, had kind of more of a fire affinity to them. So it's fairly tropic, but you could say the father figure was of the forge, and the mother figure is more of the the I don't know, the chaotic but warm aspect of life giving fire itself. And then you could take that for elves in their earthly ties, etc., and just kind of extend that out that way.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So if dwarves are fire worshippers, right, and so they engender the elemental aspect to be a fatherly and motherly type, and then if you've got someone who feels very warrior like, they simply are more inclined to the aspect of the abrasiveness of fire, the melting of fire, right? So they find an aspect within fire, and that tends to be their focus. But you can find that aspect in all of the elements, and so you just end up with two deities who have multi aspects. And so people are just like, yeah, I just happen to, I'm definitely a dwarf fire god follower, but I just happen to focus on this aspect of him rather than creating a god for every single aspect.
And I also like what was brought up about how religion in Sunderhearth feels almost like a thing of the past. Like there's been a crisis of faith recently with the shattering of what is now the Mad God. People have now maybe just a generation or two ago have suddenly lost their capability of casting magic. That there was this massive cataclysm, and now the gods are no longer speaking to us. They're no longer, granting us divine favor any longer. They've abandoned this world. So I kind of dig the idea that the majority of Sunderhearth is grasping at how to change life, how to look at things differently now that there are no gods. It's not that they're not atheistic because they don't disbelieve in the gods. They know that they once existed, but now they don't in their minds.
Right. Because we had talked about in the magic one that people who are divine magic users inside of the actual, chaotic realm of Sunderhearth are still casting divine magic, but they're doing it because you think that the aspect or the god that you follow would grant you the Tempest domain. Therefore, you have it, right? You're not so mechanically. You don't pick a god and then go, okay, I'll take this domain. You're going, hey, in my mind, my character would have this aspect, and you're picking that domain, right? And that's just how magic is represented in you. I think the Crisis of Faith is brilliant because you'll have the older races, the ones that are still rooted in this elemental, this sort of dual aspect. They remember casting magic completely. It wasn't that my grandfather did it or my dad did it. It was I did. Like, in a dwarf's lifespan, this was relatively recent that this all went to crap. And so you have, on the outside, you have these monasteries maybe where they still uphold the values of the gods, even though they're no longer gifted with the magic from them. Right? So it's not that, oh, we've been bad, they took it away. They understand that what went down in Sunderhearth is what caused it. Like, people know that. But the idea that it doesn't change that our God's still there. He's just not able to help us right now. But it doesn't relax our rules, right? That doesn't change his dogma. So we still do what we do. Just now we do it with, sutures and tourniquets and antibiotics, not with healing spells.
Yeah, and I think there'd be people who would have suffered, major crisis of faith when all this went down and left. I think there'd be people that would have kind of gone further into this blind faith and probably started to fuel ideas of war with Sunderhearth just based on what happened and the fact that this gate is there. And then there'd be people that are trying to continue on.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I definitely think that there would be people who, like Steve was saying, who have doubled down. This is the way that things have always been done. We're going to keep doing this so that whenever the gods do return, we're ready to receive them, kind of thing, and their blessing. But, there's also people who went through this, how could they, selfish, the different stages of grief, of loss, and might have, taken their chapels apart, burn them to the ground, or, use the stones to build houses for people. Or I think there's a really nice ability to have it cover a myriad of different reactions. And that gives the possibility, especially for a lot of really interesting locations to delve into, literally delve into outside of Sunderhearth. Even though magic and monsters may not be as prevalent, you could go into, the catacombs of an ancient cathedral that was once there, but had been abandoned during the crisis. I think that gives a lot of possibility for adventure outside of Sunderhearth.
I think having fractured churches on the outside also, sort of along the lines of what you just said, what it also means that there's people on the outside who are so adamant about being able to cast magic from their gods that they are now taking pilgrimages into Sunderhearth so they can reconnect, or thinking they can, which gets crazy real fast. So what do we think if the gods on the outside, right, after this all went down, literally, like, gods can sort of operate outside of time if they want to, held a council and said, look, this just went down. Everything's going to go bonkers for a bit. We need to do this for the protection of our peoples. We're going to build this wall. We're going to pull back. But we don't want them to think we abandoned them. So they had the compassion/gall to send a herald who comes down and says, hey, guys, we know you've been faithful followers since millennia ago. We're going to take a break. Don't hate us for it. here's kind of why it's in your best interest that we're not going to help you anymore. All right, bye. And you get those people who go, okay, we totally get that. That makes sense. The gods came down, they explained it to us. We understand. We're going to be penitent. We're going to have our temples. We're still going to pray. We're still going to do everything. And you have other ones who went, what? Our time of need, and you literally have the audacity to send a messenger that says you're not going to help anymore? Like, that was your last great act of magic? The world's unraveling, and your last great act of magic was to send an answering service? Like, I think that's an awesome moment in the history, and I think it sets the stage. It gives a meta reason for everyone on the outside to all of a sudden go, okay, I understand why the gods aren't around anymore. So that's not a question, right? People aren't going, well, where'd the gods go? Nope. They literally said they were dipping out. And so now there's not that qualm over where did my god go? Like, you know where he went. They explained it. Now you can accept that or resent them for it.
Yeah, and I think there's some cool character moments sort of baked in there where, you're that pious cleric that accepts this, or if you're human, your grandfather accepted this and you accept this, until that loved one is ill and there's no healing magic available. And then what do you do with that?
Yeah, I think the idea is that it builds a really complex um, a complex net of how people interact with religion in Sunderhearth, because there aren't, as with real world religion, there aren't easy answers. Um, there's differences of interpretation in the actions, recorded or otherwise, and people highlight different parts of what happened, to adhere to versus not, and that causes a lot of strain, especially like you were saying, Ben, whenever that faith is tested. Whenever you are pushed to the brink of a life experience and you feel like you can't handle it anymore, and you reach out for that help that you have so desperately invested in, and that answer doesn't come. That absolutely would be a breaking point for a lot of people. And then other people could get up and say, okay, I'm humbled by the fact that I just don't understand exactly what's going on. So I think that's anytime that you can inject something into your world that has a variety of ways to interpret it, to me that's a better thing for your setting, because that gives every player who comes to your table, every GM who's going to run a game in your setting, things to build off of and play with. And there's not a rigid, like, this is the way it has to be kind of definition. Um, One of the things too I kind of like the idea of is, because there is this greater possibility for slipping between worlds in the middle of Sunderhearth, that it may not be unheard of for people to actually see these gods in mortal form in Sunderhearth. Almost the way like Nordic mythology kind of works a little bit more, where they come down and walk amongst the mortals occasionally. And it would be very dangerous, I think, for the gods, because again, the knowledge of this ritual is out there somewhere. But I like the idea that it's possible, and there could be really interesting stories being told as to why, the father god of the dwarves has been seen wandering around Sunderhearth. He must have come here for a reason. What is he up to? What's going on?
Yeah, at least representatives from them surely would be sent. Um, I also had a thought of this separation of the planes. What does that mean for ghosts and spirits, and the presence of how many have difficulty moving on? And would those entities be also drawn to Sunderhearth?
So that's really interesting. I was just thinking about ghosts also. And what popped in my brain was I wonder if there's not a profession inside of the Sunderhearth zone that ensures spirits get to the next plane. Because there'd be a much larger chance for them to stay here. So without a ritual, you are almost guaranteeing yourself some form of undead almost every single time. And so when people die naturally, there's always this, wise woman or whatever who's around to ensure the spirit moves on. But there's that weird thing, right? Like if you're a murderer and you're doing, business is good, you also run the risk of you either need to know that ritual yourself or you run the risk of creating a lot of undead. And that's maybe not so good for business. So I really love the idea that it's more difficult, or not more difficult, but less likely that these entities want to leave, right? They're like, nah, we're like, as a ghost, I just become chaotic and crazy and love running around here terrorizing people, so I think I'll stay. Right? Or the mother who dies protecting her children, and she's like, nope, I really love my children, so I'm going to hang out. And I'm going to be this benevolent ghost. So, like, you walk into Dave's house, and it's like him and his mom, and then his 2 kids, and then there's this ghost wife sitting at the table because apparently that's normal in Dave's house.
I like the idea of there being this this other religious faction, because we've kind of talked about how there's going to be these little splinters of cults that are worshiping the shattered god, or maybe some of the incarnations of the shattered god's mind that are wandering around. And I think it's really interesting to have another. Again, it wouldn't be wholly religious because they're not necessarily practicing divine magic, but that specialize specifically in ferrying these souls from the world of the living through the crazy network of planes that exists in Sunderhearth so that they can get to their final resting place. I think it would be really cool that there's a group of clerics and paladins or whatever that are a part of this order that's what they do. Somebody passes in your home and you want them to have an eternal rest that's good. You have to call one of these individuals and they have to come and literally escort the soul to a different plane.
And when you said paladins, I was just thinking of, what if the soul or spirit left over has just some kind of tinge of magic associated with it that drew these monstrous fragments of the mad god towards them. So now you need not just a guide, but a guardian as well.
Yeah, I like that. We had discussed something about that, about like the people of Sunderhearth actually like having some kind of physiological tie to magic, I believe.
Yeah, so we had talked about it kind of early on in one of our definitely not magic episodes that we talked about magic. We talked about the idea that people who rely on magic will develop a physical trait that is expressed in them through the chaos. So you might develop, cat eyes or slight scaling, or all of your hair may go shock white, or you would be able to pick, or just whatever it is, but you would have that over time. I definitely love the idea, Ben, that if a magic user passes in Sunderhearth, that these broken aspects of the Shattered God go seeking that soul, because it would be a way to reclaim his magic back.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
I think I like the idea even more if everybody has that. It's a trace amount that might draw them if they're close enough, or if there's enough of them together.
If all of them are coming to Sunderhearth because there's this gateway, if enough of them are together, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be strong.
Right. But like a magic user, somebody who's tapped into this connection, this energy, they're like a battery of this energy.
Just light up.
Yeah. So they get stronger in this connection.
So that ties really well, because when we talked about this Shattered One we had talked about the more feral aspects of him sort of becoming these gibbering monsters, and that they sought out magic users to consume them, much in the same way that the mana kernels can be used to recharge. So magic users always have to worry about these things coming after them, right? So normal Sunderhearth person never uses magic, has to worry about it when they die. One of these things may come after their soul. Magic users have to worry about it 24/7 until the moment they die. And then they can pretty much guarantee that one's coming after them. Also, the guild of these paladins, clerics, warriors, druids, whoever they end up being, has to exist, because how badass is it to be called a soulfarer? Like, that just has to be. That's now, jumping back to one thing you had said, Jeremy, about the gods sort of walking around in Sunderhearth, and something that struck me is why would a god take that risk, right? And two things come to mind. One, because they miss their people, or two, it's hubris, right? Like, I can do it because I can. Or three, you're that sneaky god who's got some other business to take care of, right? So a lot of the ones that you see walking around, and I would imagine that even as deities, because the way Sunderhearth is broken, they can't get too far away from the epicenter for very long, or it will run the risk of damaging them, killing them, making them mortal, and trapping them. So they can't. So it's not like, oh, we'll just go get the goddess of healing from the center and we'll run her out here to solve this plague. She would love to. She can't, because it would cost her, deityhood. That's not a word, is it? Godhood? Godhood's a word.
Divinity?
That's the word. I knew there was a word. So I really love the idea that they are sort of there walking around. I also really like the idea that maybe a couple of them are there trying to figure out where their friend, brother, cousin, whatever that god is, right? Like, maybe we can make this better. Like, if we can get him and figure out what's going on, and sort of whereas the people are like, he's got the followers, right? They were trying to put him back together, but they're doing it from a very mortal level. Like, these gods can see what it is to be a god, and like, all right, so like, there's his divine spark. That's the part we have to get back, inside of some sort of vessel to be able to make him semi-whole again. And so they're kind of doing their own business, and it's interesting to be a character who all of a sudden runs into, the goddess of lies in the center of this, because she's honestly looking for her brother, cousin, whatever he is, because she's tired of not being able to empower her clerics. So yeah, she'll totally help you. Totally help you.
Well,
So,
that's one of the really nice things about most of the mythologies that have the gods coming down to walk amongst mortals, is they are unpredictable and tricky and difficult to deal with. And a lot of the times they have, the mentality of children. They're indignant, almost to a point, and especially in a world that they're no longer able to impact. Like, I would imagine, like you said, hubris would be something that would drive most of them to very desperate acts, especially if they thought there was a possibility of getting that power back. So I think, but I think there needs to be a reason why it's a huge gamble for them to come to the mortal world. Like, while they're there, any wounds that happen to them can't ever be healed, or something like that. Like, they are effectively a real mortal if they have come to the mortal coil.
yeah, I think that Passover, well, that's a weird religious term to use during this. I think that passing over essentially just turns them into a very high level fighter or paladin or cleric or wizard, right? But you can kill them, and there's no special ritual needed. You just put a sword through their throat, and it's kind of over. And I think that at first they were coming down to Sunderhearth, and they're trying to take care of the people inside. At least some of the more benevolent ones, like, hey, we got to help with this chaos. We're going there a bit more often. And then whoever our traitor is also let slip the fact that when they go there, they're mortal. And so none of them have been killed yet, but there has been that, that tangle where one of the gods got cut and someone went, yep, they do bleed. And so now there's this huge, like, you're literally taking your divinity into your hands going there.
What if one of these gods had been killed already, and the result was an increase in this chaos and everything else that's happening in Sunderhearth. And now, even more than you have a good versus evil thing going on here, you have a law versus chaos thing where you have gods on the side of chaos, suspected of being that betrayer, maybe even trying to get more of this to happen.
I think that's really cool. I think it could even possibly have been one of the other races, parental god type things that we had talked about, which would be really interesting because then one of these other outside races has this like recent void, like their religion's been basically split in half. One of their
Yeah,
deities is completely gone now. It could
I
be
think
really
the
interesting.
elves are so fed up with everything that it super makes sense. Um, them being god killers already, to care a whole lot less about what happens in the middle of the world here. Um, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
So this is way out there. So reel it back into a manageable point for me. Um, so we'd kind of gone through and listed our races, and we kind of said, hey, if you want to put this race in, you can, but it's up to you. But we're going to stick kind of with the core ones. So what if race X, pick it, doesn't matter, had existed in Sunderhearth until some 40 years ago, when their elemental, because we talked about that's pretty much a single god that has dual aspected, and then they aspect those aspects, which is really weird, but that's how they sort of get to their pantheon as far as the races goes. So the mother goddess comes down and she's helping her people. She gets murdered, and the race as a whole ceases to exist. It just instantaneously went away. Now, it carries a lot of gravitas, but it doesn't matter. Like, it literally could be, as a DM, you go, but I want Kenku in my world. Okay, so it wasn't Kenku. Pick, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But that ups the stakes for the deities. It also ups the stakes for your evil deities who are going, well, I'm the god of lizardmen, and I never really did like those elves, so all we have to do is kill, the elven god when he's on the material plane. All right, so that's the extreme of it. Now reel it back in so it makes sense.
So my initial question with that it brings up in my mind is, since we tied these races to the different kind of raw elemental powers, if we deal away with one of those races entirely, what then does the element look like on this plane? Does it change that at all? Or is it a non-PC race?
All right. What if it's a non-PC race? What if it's more ancient than the PC races? And what if it's the reason there's no dragons? Like, they just don't exist anymore.
Yeah, I like that. And possibly even the dragons were like a large part of society and understanding the workings of things and the gods and the magic, and they weren't tyrannical monsters that just swept through the countryside killing and raiding everything, but they were almost gods. They were a benevolent race before this happened.
What you think, Ben? Think unmuted.
Oops.
There you go.
Definitely sounds interesting. Not sure I've heard of that being done elsewhere. I'm gonna think about that one for a minute. Be cool to kind of consider how that ties into the Dragonborn that you had said. You know, as soon as Sunderhearth happened, I think it was humans, one of the other races that had become Dragonborn.
If only Steve had studied his notes from episode 5. I think.
Man, if only I had not completely lost all of those notes from episode 5.
No, that's.
I literally have every other document open on my computer right a second.
I'm pretty sure that's where we did talk about that, where there were some people who were.
Yeah, I know, like
not
some
splits.
gnome or some. Was it?
Yeah, we did because it was like some
But,
gnomes became
yeah.
kobolds or something, or goblins or.
Who-
All right,
Goblins,
so
kobolds, and dragonborn.
If you're watching this
Yeah.
and you have questions, see previous episode because we also have questions at the moment.
Did I mention that we were doing this live?
Yeah, it was gnomes, kobolds, it was halflings, goblins, and I think humans, dragonborn.
That sounds very right. So let's roll with it for the moment.
Yeah. So that does
so
make an interesting point.
yeah, because we had talked about like some of the like even like I think we talked about dragons even being a more primeval race than most other things were, and that's kind of why that when the magic exploded and you had that radiation fallout, why that's what happened. Okay.
But,
so I mean, definitely an idea to toy with.
Yeah, maybe because they are mixed with these other races' genetics, this kind of compilation of magical energies or whatnot, that only like the true dragons died out.
Yeah.
Like their mortal half, their normal humanoid half is kind of what kept them alive.
Makes sense to me.
If we run with that, I definitely like the idea that all Dragonborn felt it when it happened, though. Like there's just this moment.
Yeah.
It's the Yoda line, a million voices crying out and suddenly. All right, cool. So, well, I'm gonna pencil that in here. We may change it by the end of this. So, what does organized religion look like on the outside of Sunderhearth? And the reason I'm asking is we had talked about within the Council of Martyrs, right? The guys, the wizards, clerics, paladins who stayed on the outside and knew they were giving up magic in order to seal it off, right? We had talked about that one of them has become corrupt or was corrupt from the beginning, however that works out. And he's in cahoots with the splintered personality of the king of Sunderhearth. But we've jokingly keep referring to him as sort of like a Cardinal Richelieu, right? So I imagine, that in order to hold a point like that politically, was he a cleric? Was he one of the clerics on the outside? And if so, does he still sit at the head of one of the churches? Or was this guy a wizard on the outside? Either way, I think is interesting. I just wonder if the idea of the corrupt head of the church is an overdone shtick. Is it better to have this villain inside the council be non-religious or even maybe he was a worshiper of the god of magic previously as a wizard, and so now you're questioning why he did what he did. I don't know, but that's what brought the question to mind. So we kept referring to him as a Cardinal Richelieu. So what does the church or churches look like on the outside? How far have they fallen? Is it used to they had tens of thousands of worshipers who went weekly, and now they have 7?
So the way I kind of see it currently in my head is that their numbers have drastically dropped. Maybe to roughly 10% of what they were before, like a huge drop. Um, and so most of what you have in these that are still going to services and mass are the older generation that still remember the things that the gods did whenever they were in power, the ones that saw it directly, and maybe the longer lived races who might happen to be living amongst the humans and stuff outside. But I think largely people have abandoned organized religion, at least. And again, that's just the way that I kind of see it in my head. But I am happy to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Um, Maybe not entirely. There'd certainly be people who um, would have held on to their faith just to not face what had happened, especially if they were the long-lived races and lived through it. But I could definitely see newer generations um, just not wanting to have anything to do with something that's not around anymore.
I had a college professor who used to say that he found his society in church and his religion and art. And the reason he would say that is you have a lot of people who go to church or services, whatever religion you are, in order to be seen, right? Like, oh, I'm a good person because I went to church. But you can see the beauty of creation and everything when you see a painting or dance or what have you. So I wonder how much of the society has stayed around inside of the religion, right? So you have your hardcore guys, right? Those are the ones who are, is it flagellating? No. Is that farting or whipping yourself?
Yes? Question mark?
All right. Listen, no. Flatulating. Flatulence is farting. Flagellating is all right. Anyway, so you have those guys who are like, right, they're so close to the same word. You have those ones who are like, penitent and are whipping themselves or are, carving stone statues with toothpicks, waiting for the gods to return, right? And they're still very hardcore in these monasteries, but they become a lot like real life monks, right? These ascetic monks who are locked away and are maybe now they do acts of charity instead of acts of healing. Maybe if they worship the god of the forge, they're actually out there as master masons and stuff, building things, but not able to imbue it or cut corners with magic. So one of the things that sort of come out of it is, these inner circles of the churches. So like the dwarves have actually become better mundane craftsmen than they were in the past because they were using magic to shortcut things. And that goddess of healings temple who you would go by and drop a gold in and she'd take away your cold, or the cleric would, is now out there treating the plague, but are doing it through medicine because they're still trying to carry on the mission of their churches, but that's such a reduced number of people, because I would think that in a world full of magic, it's not just the religious calling that helps you, but also the glamour of being able to do magic would attract you to follow a god, right? Like, I really enjoy war, So if I'm really pious to the god of war, then he'll light my sword on fire from time to time, and that's way cool. So therefore, I'm a follower of that aspect of it. But I wonder if there is not now a Church of the Herald, right? This being that was sent down to say, hey, the gods are backing off, that politicians, kings and queens and dukes and whatnot, heads of the schools, all go to be seen there. But that message is very controlled through the governments as to what is being said to the people. Because what happens when someone goes, hey, I'm 60 years old now, but I remember back when I was, 20, when we had magic and stuff like this was curable. Like, I want to go to Sunderhearth so I can be cured, but maybe the governments don't want everybody running to Sunderhearth all the time. And so there's this message of patience and peace and waiting and almost suffrage that is spoken out by the Church of the Herald, but it's become a very political church. There's no religion to it whatsoever, but it's the most popular one for the movers and shakers to go and be seen, because that's where all the movers and shakers go. So now you have this political body guised as a church that is an up and coming religion in the world because they can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the idea that our caretaking paladins that we talked about before, they were helping usher these ghosts and souls along, were some kind of an order derivative of this religion. Because I think it opens up a lot of cool stories around the younger devout follower that can discover that they're a part of this organization that's more political than they'd like.
And I think it's really nice too having it based around the Herald. So like
Yeah.
the the consensus, or maybe even part of the lie, is that they are still in communication with the gods through this messenger, and that's why you have to keep coming to us to get the real truth. Because we literally have this, you know, this avatar that is speaking on behalf of the gods. Whether or not that avatar is actually there, actually still listening, who knows? But the power of the church would have people believe that they've basically got God on speed dial, and you got to come to them to get heard.
So I think that church at this point is being machinated by our sociopathic, like the ego king on the outside, right? Because he can use it as a tool of war. Like, we already know he's on the cusp of going after the dwarves for their firearms, like their black powder. So all it takes is that spark of saying, hey, the herald told us that the dwarven god is the one that was responsible for giving the secret of how to kill the god of magic, and so now we need to go get revenge on him. And he's united an otherwise splintered nation behind a cause.
Rachel brought up a really good comment in the chat that
Yeah.
this creates a governmental pressure for citizens to forsake Sunderhearth in a way, while on the other side of it, the rulers and the aristocrats are pillaging it for magic. So that, again, building that complexity.
That's beautiful, Rachel. That is amazing. So, oh, and what if everyone on the outside who attends the Church of the Herald is completely down with the removal of mana kernels from inside of Sunderhearth, because that's what powers their ability to currently speak to the Herald, and so it does not bother them at all when they send forces in to recover these mana kernels that are actually being brought out and given to mages and wizards and clerics, but now I can do a show of magic that shows you that we're in contact with the divine, and it's just the man behind the curtain.
Okay, so maybe outside of Sunderhearth, those who can cast magic have now taken the place of clergy. Now, instead of there being priests and priestesses, it's all wizards and sorcerers and mages and witches that they've taken on this kind of religious connotation because they're the only ones who can still do magic.
Right. So so you have a guy who was not a very well practiced wizard who all of a sudden can do some magic because he happens to be on the know of how the Church of the Heralds ran. And he skyrockets in importance and political power because he's one of the higher echelon in this fake church. It gives the ego king a way to control who's coming in and out of Sunderhearth, at least for religious purposes, right? They're preaching a message of patience and okay. And then there's a tension of the pilgrims who are coming from other gods who want to get into Sunderhearth to reconnect with. Like, it's all great and dandy that you can talk to the Herald. I would like to be able to go talk to my god, so we're still going to go. And so there's that tension now between those churches and these pilgrims coming from all of these other races. And so you get this sort of, we talked about these camps on the outside of Sunderhearth around the city side where people are waiting to go into Sunderhearth for their adventures or for whatever. Now you have entire camps that are these religious devout doing the same thing who want to be able to get in, but the government's kind of retarding their ability to be able to go because, we're a cleric to go in. We're a cleric of, Bob able to go inside and get one of these mana kernels that allows him to do magic on the outside, and that pulls away a lot of the power from. And I think that magic returning to the Church of the Herald is a relatively recent thing, right? It was sort of coincided with the discovery of the mana kernels, right? That they realized that they could empower some of their people on the outside. And so that's been maybe something in the last 2-3 years that's happened.
So I kind of like the idea that there was something that happened, and I don't want to get too much into it because we've got history coming up in a separate episode, but I think there was some kind of uprising or something that was challenging the validity of this church, and they needed some kind of proof as to still having this connection to the gods. And I think that's where they discovered, I think they might have understood what these kernels were for, possibly even longer than that, but they were scarce. They were hard to come by. And this challenge of their authority, this challenge of their validity, caused a massive push to get in, reclaim more of these arcane kernels, and bring them back in bulk, so that they could prove their abilities to cast magic.
So, what if our Cardinal Richelieu individual, our head of the martyrs, was a wizard or a sorcerer? And he's one of the first to get a hold of, not personally, it was brought back to him. He's the first person to crack what a mana kernel can do, right? So he becomes one of the first re-empowered magic users on the other side. He's not going to go around flaunting that because of the problems it creates. So when this church has the uprising and a problem, he's the one that goes, hey, I know a way to be able to get past this, but, of quid pro quo. And so he's not in charge of them, but he has his thumb on them, right? Because between himself and this church, now they are the market, or at least the way that they're able to get these kernels out of Sunderhearth, because he's part of the people that control whether or not you have entrance.
And I'm going to toss this out there. I kind of like this idea a lot because I really like when different threads kind of come back and synergize what's going on. But please, by all means, veto this if you need to. But I kind of like the idea that this wizard was the one who actually killed the mad god, or shattered his brain, his mind. He was the one who enacted the final part of this ritual or something.
So the ritual gets enacted at the sort of epicenter of Sunderhearth, right? Like, we know that's where it goes down. And he sees the fecal matter hitting the rotary device, as it were to say, and so he bails. And his bailing is what breaks the ring that the wizards might have been able to contain what happened on the inside, but he gets freaked out and he bails. And so when he does, he it's his spell, he enacts it. He was the chief, head doctor of this wizards. That's weird. And yeah, so he's not only responsible for the death of, or the breaking of, the god of magic, he's responsible for Sunderhearth being what it is, because he was too chicken to stay around and finish the end of the killing part of the ritual. Yeah, I'm good for that. I have to stay around and endure this to make sure nothing bad happens. Nah, I'm out. And so he runs, a little bit of teleportation magic, ends up on the outside, and assumes a position amongst the martyrs. Oh yes, I'll give up my magic in order to protect everything and also cover my mistakes.
Yeah, exactly, and shut that god in a box.
Right.
So that I'm okay out here.
No, that's perfect. I love it.
Okay. I love that. I also love now that the monsters that are the gibbering sort of id of the Shattered God, the ones that are these the monsters that seek out magic to feed on it. They have some sort of wolves howl, right? Horses neigh. They have some sort of bay, some sort of sound that they utter that is a bastardization of this guy's name, because they're calling out because they know he's responsible, but because no one knows, this guy's using his wizard name, not his true name. It's not necessarily directly connected, but someone in your story could make that connection, depending on what type of campaign you want to run. But that's the sound they make. And yeah, ego, not id, whatever. Dude, does anywhere on my shirt say psychologist, sociologist, psychiatrist? No. Sorry guys, I'm talking back to my dad.
Sass.
I can do it because I'm too old to be grounded now.
Because you don't still live in the same place.
Right. I mean, I'm close enough. He can still drive over and smack me. But all right. So, ouch. Let me throw that into the notes real fast. Ben, what do you have to add to that? What you got going in your brain over there, sir?
I think my mind was already going in that direction as far as the connection between this martyrs guy and this herald religion. So I really like that. Yeah, I can't really think of anything else that wouldn't just be a detail for a DM to improv.
Yeah, it's a good idea to leave a lot of room for that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
Cool. I know your dad, Steve, brought up something about there possibly being an underground cult who follows the queen who took on the fire elemental.
Right. So we had talked about the queen being, she had some sort of elemental blood in her, which allowed her to do this. So do we think that the followers of the cult know it's the queen as the elemental, or if they just come to worship the flame of the hearth as it's what protects them? Because we know that some of the high-ranking hearth wardens know it's the queen. Like, that is a secret that is given to some of the highest-ranking hearth wardens. I wonder if we have like a Ben Kenobi type who is watching over the queen and her child, because that's the baby fire, in a capacity where they have fostered this religion on the inside, because that gives another layer of protection to her, where she'd have devout followers, and things were to go crazy. They don't have to rely on these, 10, 12, 13 hearth wardens all of a sudden be able to respond back to the castle when they're spread across, all of Sunderhearth. That there is this cult that has, maybe it's on the fringe of becoming a full-on church that worships the flame. And the queen obviously is a pretty benevolent, good person if she was willing to sacrifice all of this for the people. And as we said, sort of inside of Sunderhearth, if you think that rock over there is giving you magic and it allows you to cast the spell rock, well, that's you. So if these people firmly believe that they're getting their magic from the flame, then it just becomes its own religion, and this old hearth warden has sort of stoked that flame. Wow, fire analogies. In order to be a second level of protection, right? Like maybe personally he also, he was the queen's brother, or he was, a young knight who pined for her or whatever, and so he has helped to, ensure that there is this cult that wants to worship her, and that they are well received. Like that the hearth wardens don't necessarily say they're members of this religion, but everyone knows that they're kind of affiliated, because now this old hearth warden is part of it.
Yeah, so maybe it's not uncommon for people to worship, in some sense or another, the flame, but only this cult knows the truth about who she was before, about the fact that she was this queen.
Or maybe even further than that, they're the only people outside of the high-ranking wardens that realize that she has a child that is also another flame that can be separated, right? We had talked about that like eons ago, it seems like, where her child is the baby flame that's currently being held. Oh, Notes, come here. Come on, someone in chat who watched these videos more recently than me. All right, so the elemental is the queen. Her passion enabled her to become the elemental. Her daughter is... Oh, yeah, all right. So the hearth wardens have a second flame, a much smaller one, that's her child. And so that's the failsafe for the hearth ever to go out, is this baby can also be used to relight the beacons. And so I think that the actual church of the flame, maybe they are actually the nursemaids to this baby.
Yeah, that is a good synergy to it. I like that. They're told the truth of the relationship between these two flames.
Right.
Because they have to understand how important it is to protect this and to keep it secret. Which keeps them an underground cult instead of a full-blown, religious force.
Right.
Yeah. And it's also really nice, too, how you were talking about that members of this cult could even very potentially be hearth wardens. Not all hearth wardens are necessarily members of this cult, but, they would have members in their ranks, at least. That's cool. I like that a lot.
All right, so we'll say my dad's over here keeping notes for us. So we have the Church of the Herald on the outside. We have the Children of the Id on the inside, which is the militant church of the Shattered Gods Id on the inside that are trying to help put him back together. And yes, that is it. 110%. Yay, Rachel, for taking better notes than I do. Just so we're all aware, I just sent that to Rachel in a PM, and that's why she repeated it. But I definitely knew what I was talking about. Not at all. All right, so we had the we have the Cult of the Flame, the Church of the Herald, and then the Children of the Id, which is the militant organization on the inside. And then you have any number of churches that are remnants on the outside. So if your character concept or your campaign concept calls for a church of this type of god, it just simply exists. No problems. Right? It's just on the outside for the most part. Perfect.
Good.
Okay, cool. I'm responding to something in the chat, but it helps if you can spell. So yeah, I think we are rounding up on an hour and a half. So I don't know if we want to start trying to find ways that we can kind of tie off loose ends, and then have Ben do his signature edition, whatever he wants that to be, and then we can put a bow on it.
All right, so I'm just going to run through notes here, and then we can tie some loose ends. All right, so we know that there are multiracial gods. There are gods for all the races. The races outside of humans tend to be a dual-aspected, elementally based deific couple. The mother or whatever, and the father or whatever. And then the races, or the people of that race would tend to worship an aspect thereof, each of those. On the outside, after everything went down, the gods sent a herald to sort of say, hey, we're taking a step back, like it or lump it. And then they sort of help shift the cosmology so that there is a separation between the planes on the outside, thus creating Sunderhearth being the sort of doorway between planes at the moment. Inside of Sunderhearth, the gods do occasionally appear and walk around. It used to be a bit more common until one of the gods, who was the god of dragons, was killed. At that moment, all dragons died. Now, did they cease to exist or die? That would be a loose end to tie up real fast. Just dying is kind of cool because that means there's dragon bones everywhere.
Absolutely, yeah. Dragon bones and their treasure.
Right, just dragons. So on top of that, we have the guild of individuals on the inside who ferry souls. Undead is much more likely on the inside than it is on the outside. In fact, on the outside is pretty much impossible. Maybe. Religion on the outside is pretty much fallen by the wayside, with the exception of the Church of the Herald, which is truly a political party under the guise of a church. That are using kernels from inside to empower magic users to seem like they are still in contact with the Herald, preaching a message of patience so that the benefits and costs of Sunderhearth can be manipulated by that church. And we know that the martyr Cardinal Richelieu guy was the wizard responsible for the spell that causes the destruction of the god of magic, but he fled before the protection spell was finished. And that's what ends up eventually causing Sunderhearth. And so he took a position on the Council of Martyrs in order to sort of hide his mistakes. All right, what you got, Jeremy?
I just had something that I wanted to say about the dragons disappearing, an idea that kind of popped up whenever you brought that up. What if, when the god or goddess was slain, the dragons didn't die? The dragons were bereft of souls. So the dragons became like undead dragons that then started to terrorize and do all the things that they weren't doing before. But we're at a point in the history or story that there was a massive undertaking of people that went and slaughtered systematically these horrors, and the prevailing thought is they're gone, they're dealt with, and forever never going to be a problem. But you could always have that one time in a campaign or a one shot where, oh, undead dragon. Just a thought.
So that's really interesting because I was thinking that since we were saying that undead are much more common inside of Sunderhearth, that having an undead dragon or two inside of Sunderhearth was the crazy bit. But I like it. So there was and maybe still is an issue with actual undead dragon monsters on the outside of Sunderhearth. And they had to beat it without magic. And that was the big kickstart to the dwarves and their black powder research. And during that demonstration is when the current Crazy King went, I need that. I also have a gut level feeling that the Church of the Herald has an undead dragon somewhere that they know about, that they're keeping in chains or tabs on, at least, because they're a bunch of jerks. Oh, and if you're that twisted DM, now you can have a cult of the undead dragon. It's like its own religion. Yep, I like it. I love it. All right, cool. So undead dragons on the outside. Yipes. And yes, Rachel, I was thinking the same thing. It would create some prejudice towards Dragonborn, 100%. So, but by the same token, maybe that's where the sort of goblin and kobold race flips lost a bit of their prejudice, is because because we're talking about those being gnomes, and what did we say the dwarves turned into? Anyone remember? Whatever they are, because it wasn't Durgar. Like I thought we'd gone with something else. Azers? Maybe they just went to being Azers. I have no idea. But maybe that's where part of their loss of prejudice came from, is because they were the forefront troops going up against these undead dragons, and so people saw them as heroes in this fight against the dragons, and so there's less hostility towards being a goblin or kobold or whatever dwarves turned into. Ben, can you hear us? Nod if you can hear us. Wave if you can hear us. Smile if you want to smile.
He said his audio's gone bananas. He's hearing like 3 different conversations. I don't know what conversations. I hope they're good conversations.
Maybe he's back. Are you back?
I think I might
Yay!
be back.
All right.
Sweet. Cool.
So
that was weird.
I think we have come to the time where you, sir, get to put your mark on this world, and it shall forever be written in stone. So this is a moment that we call our signature, right? You're going to sign the world with one facet, idea, whatever you want. That's it's yours, and it will not ever go away.
Alrighty. Let's see. So I really like the lull versus chaos theme that's going on, kind of as opposed to other settings, kind of good versus evil themes. So I think that when Sunderhearth happened, and those who were close turned in kind of these calcified bodies, that there were a few who had something else happen. I think that much of their bodies and their internal systems and organs were changed or augmented somehow with this kind of what was it, mana heart or kernel or whatever kind of substance, and they have this essence kind of flowing within their blood, to where you have kind of birthed a new kind of chaos sorcerer that has become kind of a new bloodline where they have enough of a connection to this stuff to maybe slightly more easily, maybe just less dangerously manipulate magic when they have access to it, avoiding some of this chaos or using some of this chaos to even protect themselves sometimes. Not really sure what I would call them, other than chaos sorcerers.
Is this the kind of thing that would drive them to the point of possibly becoming insane?
Yeah, I think over time, I think it's more of a slow thing because they would kind of grow up with this
Sure.
eventually. So it would have to be slower, but definitely being exposed to manipulating this chaos as much as they do. Yeah, they would definitely, just by nature of using it more, be hitting those sanity tables a lot more.
So we had talked about the use of sanity tables, and we talked about the fact that people could essentially boost their magic by willingness to take on sanity damage or sanity rolls during the magic magic episode. So I like the idea of these chaos sorcerers. I like the idea that they are more mutant than human at this point because of how much they've used magic. So like they don't just have one characteristic, but they have the shockwave hair and they've got lizard eyes and they have scale. Like they're kind of monstrous in appearance. We'd have to sit down and like plan out like any sort of mechanics that went with it. But one of the things that sort of that sits out in my mind is maybe they roll twice on the effects from sanity table and they just get to pick which one they want, right? Because they're used to channeling the chaos in that way. So yeah, I love it. I will create a separate Sunderhearth document for these guys so that we can start. This is the first real like mechanic thing that we've had sort of written into stone so far. That we had talked about sanity tables and stuff like that, but we hadn't really done it. But I'm not going to change our policy. You spoke it; it's done. So we'll get together with the three of us at the very least, if not some of the other brilliant minds that are behind the scenes that help us with this. Particularly Karen Davies, because she helps me a lot, and we'll handle the mechanics part of it. And if it's kosher with you guys, maybe that's the first little teaser bit that we let slip from Sunderhearth is the Chaos Sorcerer bloodline, and let people start putting it in their one shots and stuff, and that way we get a little bit of feedback before it's a thing, but also introduce a little bit of Sunderhearth to the public. I kind of like the idea. I mean, we are at the halfway point. It's about time we gave someone something other than a headache. All right, so let me jump into notes here. Ben Fisher's signature. I'm gonna call them Chaos Sorcerers for now, unless you tell me that you're changing the name.
Sure.
Cool. While Steve is doing that, I guess I can go ahead and start getting us working towards a close here. So, thank you very much, always, Steve. Again, this was a brilliant idea. I'm so glad that you offered me the chance to come on and be a part of this project. It's been a very, very interesting experiment so far. And again, I know I say this every single time, but I'm really excited about running games in this setting. I already have a laundry list of ideas that I really want to see happen. So it's going to take some dedication and willpower to make sure that I don't start putting those ideas into other other games that I'm running in the meantime. But yeah, thank you also, Ben, for agreeing to come on, for being interested in the project, and for coming and sharing your ideas with us tonight about the religion for Sunderhearth.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to do some world building. especially you guys.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you. World building is certainly a love of mine. It's one of the parts of the hobby that I enjoy the most,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I've never had the opportunity to do it on a level of collaboration like this before. So that's been a really cool way to stretch my usual methods of coming up with ideas for settings, and it's been infinitely more fruitful and at a much more fevered pace than I normally would be able to build a world. So, uh, yeah, Steve, do you have any closing thoughts or anything to add here?
No, Ben, thanks for all your contribution, and thank you to everybody who is in the chat contributing also. As we said before in other episodes, if we do incorporate your ideas, which we are likely to, don't be weirded out if one of us reaches out to you and says, "Hey, how do you want to be credited?" So, because we'll definitely credit you in the at least the PDF document that's going to be generated from this, and we'll have to see where it goes beyond that. But yeah, man, no, a great session. Uh, lots of good stuff. I love it when stuff starts sort of hooking back to itself, right? And like that makes it feel more tangible, right? Things are starting to settle into the strata of believability. As weird as that sounds, like, but it's starting to realize itself. I guess is a better way of phrasing it. So I appreciate it, guys.
Absolutely. Ben, was there anything else that you wanted to say or touch on before we head out?
I think we covered just about everything. I don't have anything else. Just thanks again.
Fantastic. Definitely our pleasure, man. All right. Well, everyone who has tuned in with us, thank you so much. It really does mean a lot. I'm very, very proud to be hosting this experiment here on the Erasmus Expeditions. If you like what you saw, you've got 5 previous episodes and at some point 6 following episodes after this. So I hope that you continue to enjoy what we have to offer and look forward to seeing some of you put interest into games that will take place in this world. And until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.